Oh, lovely day again. It's wonderful to be here again on this podcast. I want to welcome all of you into this today. And today we are dealing with a great topic about personal branding. You are a brand in yourself. Wow, Newton, welcome.
Thank you so much. Once again, we'd like to take this opportunity to thank each of you that has been listening on this podcast. We hope that you're finding the topics to be relevant and applying them in your life, that you're sharing the podcast. Please, if you know somebody that is going through anything that we are discussing, or you have a topic that you would like to share, as we've said before, please feel free to be able to do it. I am excited to be here today to discuss on this very important topic about personal branding and why you are important as a brand. And I look forward to very interesting discussions, Dennis. But I want us to start actually by looking at the negative side.
Okay.
Because I think people normally don't assume. What do you understand by a negative brand?
I think for me, a negative brand is the one that doesn't communicate the person who you are. Doesn't basically represent your values, your beliefs. For me, that would be a negative brand. And I think for me, especially for this age of social media, everyone is deceiving everyone and being who they are not, just for the sake of they say clout chasing, but the reality is it is purely not being the brand that you're meant to be.
And they say that the internet never forgets.
Yes,
but I think
people
forget that whereas we talk about brand building, there's also brand destruction.
Very true.
And brand destruction is when if people, what they see about you, what they hear about you is not, as you said, something that represents you, then as it is already, that's a negative brand. And I remember we were with you when we did this workshop, and there was a story about somebody who actually lost a job simply because of what they had tweeted. I think it's important for people to realize that a negative brand can actually have far much more disastrous consequences, especially in this age of the internet. Why is it important to have a strong brand?
Hey, that is automatic, Newton, because number one, I don't think there is anyone in this world who wants to be remembered for bad things. I think I've seen even convicts who, at the end of their life, except the one for Mafia, the one who died the other day, but I've seen people remorseful about who they have been. I've seen people try to reach out to the families they had before and tell them, I'm really sorry, and I wish I didn't do what I did. And I think for me, that goes to the why of why we must have a strong brand. In that, when we check out, and I know we said it in the previous podcast. Actually, is it in the book of? Remind me the book again. We've done a book that talks about, the writer talks about when you came into the world, people celebrated and you cried. But live in a way that when you leave the world, people cry as you celebrate. Yeah, because that's a brand. Basically, you have represented your brand to the point that I am so happy about it. When I leave this shall live on forever. And I think for me, that speaks of the why of having a strong brand. Because you will never erase it. And remember, we've talked about social media. You will never change it. You may go there, remove, you will never still change it. But for me, live a life and live a brand that will always be remembered. And let me ask a question. Isn't that why we have our parents' names? It's so interesting.
But that's a good point. That is assuming that the name that you're carrying also is a positive and a strong brand. There are people who actually change their names.
Yeah,
you remember
sure.
that, isn't it?
That's very true.
And you remember we used to watch this story about Al Capone, for example.
Yes.
And there was this guy who was the drug mafia. I forget what the name was from Colombia. But it's true. I mean, the name is powerful. I was thinking about also one of the books that we had done in our book club. It was this book by Marshall, and he was saying, think about the presidents. The fact that they have a press secretary, they have somebody that literally just writes to make sure what they're communicating is going to be effective. When you think about yourself as a brand, what are you doing to build your brand? And that's the next part I wanted to ask you. What are some of the things that you can do so that to make sure you're working towards building your brand? Yes, making sure that whatever is being posted, whatever is being linked to you on social media is positive, but what other things can you do to be able to build on yourself as a brand?
Number one is we keep going back almost to the why. because it's me realizing who I am.
It's the season of the why.
Yes, as a person. I think one of the biggest challenges, Newton, I see in our world today, there's a lot of copying. So when you are looking for the genuine thing, it is very hard to get. I mean, from the products, name it, from the marketplace. I mean, there's always an alternative. Now, the problem for me, I feel like life seems to almost dictate to people to live that way. In that I can be whoever I want to be in the situation, depending on how it comes. Now, that becomes a situation where people now have split personalities. People run into challenges later on because now you've played out this personality to the point you have become that personality that you are not in the first place. So for me, I actually would go back to being who I am. Who am I? Discovering who am I. After I've discovered who am I, we tackled it the other podcast, is number 2. How do I make myself stand out? Now that's branding. How do I make myself stand out? How do I make myself look different from the rest? How do I make myself look the best? And I think all these things go into branding, because if I stand out as a person, if I give out a good image about me, if I communicate clearly, then that's building my brand.
No, that's very important. One of the things that people tend to forget is that a brand is holistic. So you need to look at yourself, from a 360-degree perspective and identify the areas that you need to build on. Let's say, for example, you're building your career and you realize that I'm not a very good communicator. I need to work on that part of my branding. How do I improve on becoming a good public speaker? Or I'm not a very good writer. I need to be much more crispier or succinct in the way I write because of the work that I do. And that becomes very important.
Very true.
Being able to identify what I like to call the blind spots and then putting in place what we've been saying, a concrete action plan towards building that will help you to make sure your brand actually stands out. And the beauty about a positive brand is that the brand equity then also goes up.
Very true.
And the vice versa is true, because when your brand is not strong enough, then your brand equity also goes quite down. I've known people, for example, that just seek to be in the presence of other people. They feel like it's just an honor to just sit and work with them or to tap on their wisdom. Why? Because those people's brand equity is so high. They have such a strong brand image, and there are people who you don't even want to be associated with. What you were saying earlier, it's not just them. You're saying, please, can you cut me from that photo, because I don't want to be seen that I was with this person.
So sure.
And it tells you that other brand is probably, let me not say worthless, but doesn't add any value. And that's a question we need to ask ourselves. Is your brand the kind that people actually want to associate with? Or is your brand the kind that people do not want to associate with?
Now, new generation will argue and say that so long as you're meeting your targets, the branding is okay. And I think you realize the danger. Newton comes in later on. I've seen people on social media who have cried because of being bullied, because you see, you're exposing yourself to any kind of person out there. You don't know who you'll meet. You may think you are the toughest until you meet the tougher one out there.
Kenyans on Twitter.
Yes. And then there's normally a saying that goes like, on the block I live in, we are all tough guys. So the first one is a tougher, but I live on the far end, so I'm the toughest. until you meet someone who's actually tougher and worse than you. And you realize that they can really, really make you feel terrible and actually lose your own identity and personality. So even as we talk about these things, Newton, I think I want us to also delve to the side where someone is caught up in a place where they want to build their brand. Okay, I'm in this particular position. I know myself. I know what I can give. I know I can be better at this. What would you advise such a person?
But even before I come to that, I want to take 2 steps back, because I think you've raised a very important point. You need to be careful that the brand that has been built is by yourself, not by somebody else. Because I think that the danger of social media is that you can actually have this image that has been placed so highly, but it's not by people that understand you. So when the truth comes, you realize there's a big variance between what was projected and what is the truth. And I agree with you. There is, of course, a risk out there that you're going to be bullied. And I think we know about the internet trollers. But one thing that doesn't change, and I've learned this again from what we have read in our book club, usually the people that sit in the audience are the loudest critics.
Very true.
You have to remember,
Very
not the
true.
ones that are in the ring.
Very true.
When you're comfortable on the chair,
And the
you're very
biggest
quick to find
advisors.
all the wrong things, yes. And yet you cannot put yourself into the fight.
Very
so
true.
I think my advice, and I always tell people that, even when you're building your brand, you have to be careful, because not everybody that is critiquing you is doing it for the right reason. And you should not
Very
take it
true.
in.
Very
You need to learn to pick out the feedback that will help you, that is constructive, from people that are just, as we like to say, trollers on the internet. And those are quite a number. We call them internet tigers or desktop or keypad tigers. They are very good when it comes to unleashing a vitriol of abuse online.
Very
but
true.
usually it's to try and bring the other people down. But no, in the end, we usually say it's
So
a
that's
reflection.
their brand. To bring
Exactly. That's a reflection of themselves.
Yes,
And I'm not sure about that. That's the kind of brand that you want to be associated. Because bullies are bullies.
Yeah,
I mean,
for sure.
before we had internet, we had people who were bullies in school, from kindergarten,
Yeah,
primary
for
school,
sure,
high
for
school.
sure.
And so
That's
it doesn't change. The only thing is that there are people who found a lot more energy now that they are, online to be
Yes.
able to bully others. And usually they even use pseudo accounts. So they don't even want to come out and to
And
be
be
identified.
themselves.
But I think I also want to take this a step further and say, what does the brand have to do with your success at work and personal life? Why is it important to have a strong, positive brand? When we talk about work, we talk about your work life, we talk about your personal life, about your spiritual life. What has that got to do with a positive brand?
When we talk of brand, Newton will go back. I'll go back to what I said. You have to go back to who you are as an individual. And I remember in the previous podcast, we also tackled almost the similar thing, because if you actually understand your why, you completely will know how to brand yourself. Now, I'm assuming already you know how to brand yourself. Now, why you will stand out in your workplace is because everyone seems to think, all right, or assume in that particular manner that you are a person who's hands-on. You always know what to do when it needs to be done. So you are not someone who is walking around just waiting for instructions. In other words, if you receive instruction, you go a step further and do it better than, because you understand your brand and you don't want anything else you do to come out anyway negatively, apart from the person you are and what you believe in. And I think for me, this stands out, especially in workplaces, be it whichever environment you're in, be it a personal business, goes back to who you are representing. And if you believe in the brand that you are, you always strive that that brand stands out. You don't do it in a way that will compromise how you believe. Your beliefs, your everything, basically your whole why will be seen in your brand. I remember I was working as a salesperson, and I remember our boss was telling us that a customer buys you before they buy your product. So if you are not selling yourself, the customer will look at you, look at your product and think, man, there's such a big disconnect. I can't take that brand. You are getting
Exactly, because there's a brand you're selling and there's yourself,
Yes, yourself.
as a
Very
brand.
true.
It's amazing. And maybe part of our audience that are listening would be asking, but what has the brand got to do with the way I dress, the way I talk, my tone of voice? Why would that matter as far as my brand is concerned?
Newton, that matters a lot. They normally say that you are dressed the way you look. If someone looks at you and addresses you in accordance with how you look, you may want to say, we are new age, people should accept me the way I am, but that's not really the case. Human beings are human beings. They'll see you and judge you by how you look. When you talk of voice, it basically means I have command of what if I'm a salesman and I have to convince you to let go of your car, Newton, to get a bigger car. How do I have to make you part?
So that would be very difficult.
Yes, no, I'm saying,
That's an enlightened
but you're getting, yeah?
Yes.
But yet, Newton, you understand, even from a salesman perspective, but you need to create in me a discontentment with what I have, and I'll view what you are selling as, no, that's what I must have. You are getting. If I don't have the language, if I don't have command in my language, if I don't have mastering in my language, you look at me and think, this is a lost person. Actually, he's just looking for a simple coin. He's a cheap salesperson who's been hired just to look for some coin to put in his pocket.
And the person's brand doesn't speak to what they're
Exactly.
selling. 100%, I agree.
Exactly.
I think one of the things that people tend to also forget is it's not just about what you say, but even your body language when you're communicating. And you're right about when you're dressing, because human beings are such judgmental characters.
Very true.
Usually within the first 15 minutes that we see somebody, inevitably you have judged. So you're right. Your brand literally starts from the word go, from the moment you're seen.
Yes.
And of course, even when you're being also listened to, the way you speak, your tone of voice, everything has to do with your brand. As we think about our audience, and maybe as we give them what would be the take-home lessons when it comes to our branding, what to you probably is the biggest example of the most successful brand that you can think of?
For me, I would go, Coke is big, man. I mean, I always look at Coke and wonder, how are these guys able to go on year after year? And it's still big. It still keeps growing. So I always wonder, what do they do? And actually, someone told me it's purely branding. It's purely branding. And how they make sure that you feel you should take a Coke, especially. Do you know, it's so amazing. I was reading about Coke and realizing they only do campaigns when it's cold. Because they know when it's hot, definitely, you'll go look for a
yes.
you'll rush for a Coke.
Yes.
So I think for me, that stands out for a brand. In that this is a company that basically believed in what they are doing. And the reason why Coke doesn't write on a Fanta, you know, a Fanta Coke. It is not written. It's because Coke stands out as Coke, as it is. And
everything from the bottle, the color,
you're
the
getting.
taste.
It is purely Coke. So yes, they have Fanta as a brand. They have Sprite right there as a brand. But I mean, you will never equate the two. Always Coke stands out as a brand for them.
And it's interesting, maybe you didn't know this, but I remember there's a story about Coke that sometimes in the mid-80s, because they were facing so much competition from Pepsi, and Pepsi had done what was called a blind test. People were being given a Pepsi and a Coke, but you didn't know what you're taking, and you're told that test the difference. So Coke, at that time, in their wisdom, decided to just change their test a little bit so that they could compete. Unfortunately, the backlash was so much, and people actually protested. You can imagine people go to the street because they said, "You want to kill us? We want our Coke back." And that's how they went back, and now came. They had to go to the original test, and now they called it Coke Classic. And I think, by the way, they never changed their test after that. But you're right about the power of brand. And how that really impacts. For me, I think the one individual that I really, actually two, for me, that speaks a lot about how they were able to have a very strong brand. One was Nelson Mandela. And Nelson Mandela built this person of a value-based leader. You know, despite being imprisoned for 27 years and having to face these people, he came out and sort of seamlessly was able to fit into the State House and worked with the people that tormented him. I mean, his brand as a leader is undisputed. True. And I think to date, the second person for me, I think that really comes as a very strong brand is Barack Obama. I believe that from the moment he graduated and started working, you know, the president started building a brand that became so strong. It wasn't surprising, and it's unlikely there's ever going to be somebody like Obama who, you know, came in from being a first-time senator with such a very strong charisma and brand that it didn't take a lot for him to transition and demonstrate that he could be the president. Because think about it, the odds didn't work for him. I mean, he wasn't, you know, he didn't have parents that were both Americans. Of course, we know that, yes, he was half Kenyan, and we are very happy that he was half Kenyan.
But certificate
exactly. Under normal circumstances in a country that is, you know, considered to be one of the most powerful in the world, it's really difficult for you to sail through, even knowing that one of your parents didn't come from the US. But that was a powerful brand, and it still stands strong to date. And I think as we urge our audience and our listeners today, it's really important to build your brand. Your brand is not just going to help you in terms of career, in terms of your personal life, in terms of the friendships, the relationships that you have, but having a positive brand is likely to improve your trajectory and your growth. And as I said, the vice versa is true. When you have a negative brand, then you're likely to suffer, not just in your relationships, but even at work, but even in the people that you relate to. And really, that would be my urge to your audience today.
Take home today, your best you is defined by your brand, and you are your best brand. Thank you for joining us today. Have a lovely time. Coaching for Impact again, the place to be. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.